Parents really need to be comfortable with having uncomfortable conversations and being the ones hopefully to introduce them for the first time.
Yes.
Because if your child brings that home, they've already heard a point of view which they are more inclined to believe because they don't necessarily think that a teacher, a coach, a friend is going to tell them a lie.
Outstanding is a production of The Washington Stand, your source for news and commentary from a biblical worldview.
Congratulations, you've found Outstanding, the podcast where we examine important issues in the news and how they affect your life from a biblical worldview. I'm Casey Harper with The Washington Stand, and I'll be your host for this episode. Kids are in danger. Destructive transgender ideologies have become the law of the land in some of our most important institutions. It seemed to happen overnight. Even in red states and conservative towns, hospitals, schools, even gyms have gone woke. As a kid, the doctor's office and school are two places you seem to go more than anywhere else. But now, those places are where kids are most pressured to submit to transgender ideology. Are you sure you're a boy? You can be a girl, you know. Why don't you want to be a girl? Are you sexist? Can you imagine a teacher or coach saying that to your child or grandchild? It's happening. God made them male and female? Pfft, don't worry. The experts know better. Or at least they think they do. Now today, I have a couple of experts of my own, but don't worry, your kids are safe from them. Alleigh Marre leads the American Parents Coalition, a group working very hard on these issues. Alleigh previously served as Chief of Staff and Senior Civilian Advisor to the Secretary of the Air Force, where she received the Air Force Decoration for Exceptional Civilian Service. She also served as the national spokesperson for the Department of Health and Human Services during the Trump administration. She served in a variety of other communications roles, including for 2 U.S. senators, a governor, and 2 national political committees. That means she has a high tolerance for grappling and putting up with nonsense, I think. That makes her a great fit for taking on the transgender issue, probably. She's also a mother of 4, which is great and amazing. And we also have Joshua Arnold. He's a very good writer at The Washington Stand. He's one of my favorite, actually, and he's been covering these issues very well for a long time. So thanks for joining me, guys. I appreciate it.
Happy to be here.
Thanks for
Of course. So, man, there's so much going on in this issue. The transgender and kids issue is not new, but there's a few battlefields I want us to walk through. We have, hospitals, which I think have a sort of financial incentive that we can talk about. And then we have the education system, which I think most of the focus has been there. And President Trump has, focused on that a little bit. And then we have kind of actually sort of, I would call it the locker room battlefield. That ties into education often. But we've even seen, and Alleigh, maybe this is a good place to start, your group sent a letter to the federal government over the YMCA, which I thought the C stood for Christian, and I thought this was a family-friendly organization, and you might have a YMCA, your local conservative town or Trump-voting county, but based on your letter, that's not what's happening.
That's true. So a few months ago, we noticed that even in the post-Title IX executive order change from the Trump administration, that there were still complaints coming through from various branches across the country, to your point, some of them in traditionally red places where there were males in the female locker room and where women were complaining about not having privacy and the ability to just basic things like change their clothes.
And not just them, like their children. Like
Correct.
We're seeing cases where you bring your 7-year-old daughter to swim class.
Exactly.
And all of a sudden there's a possibly mentally disturbed man walking around naked.
Correct.
And you have to question the motives. Even transgender people, I feel like we've all had this experience where someone's walking around in the locker room, and at a certain point you're like, okay, are you trying, we're all kind of wearing at least something, and you start to question people's motives. But in this case, I wanted to point out that it's not just this sort of angry mother who's 45 and annoyed by somebody. She might have brought her kid in there too, and there's a fully intact man in the locker room, right?
That's right. And one of the examples we talk about quite frequently is Washington State. There was an elderly woman in her 80s who noticed this, and she was uncomfortable by it, specifically because she noticed that this man was staring at some younger girls, 16, 17-year-old girls. She brought it to the attention of the front desk at the Y, and she was the one who was reprimanded. In fact, she was banned for life from the Y. And so we saw instances like this. That's an older example, but we saw instances like this in Missouri and Ohio happening post-Title IX change. So there was no longer the excuse of, oh, well, Biden changed it and we're just trying to comply. So we took all that information, put it into a note to our subscribers, and just gave them the heads up and said, hey, this is what's going on. I know many of you rely on the YMCA for summer enrichment programs for your kids and for childcare, especially in the summer with school out. So just here's some resources for you to use to call your local YMCA, ask these questions. Make sure, if nothing else, you have a good understanding of what precautions are or are not in place before your kids get there. After that, we noticed that the YMCA National, not, a branch here and there.
So it's like the national headquarters, and then there's all these chapters.
Correct.
Right, okay.
They actually scrubbed their website. They took down all of the recommendations and the guidance that said how to create a gender-inclusive camp, how to, and again, camp, this means overnight accommodations. So camps, sports teams, et cetera, these were all guidance and recommendations that had been on their website since 2017.
Right.
So not even just the Biden era. And so they scrubbed all that, took it down. And that was what made us, to loop back to your first point, write a letter to the federal government. We sent it to HHS, HUD, and also the Department of Education, because between those entities, they've given the YMCA a nearly $600 million
Wow.
per year grant. Annually, grant budget.
Okay, so we're talking billions over a decade.
Lots of money.
That tells you so much about the federal government, and that we think the YMCA needs a multi-billion-dollar budget over a decade to have like a pool for the local community. I mean, what in the world could they possibly be needing, like the cost of F-35s to have a weight room for the local gym? But keep going. I'm sorry.
It's a great point. And so we've been funneling all of this money to this organization, which I think many of us assumed was, if nothing else, a wholesome place where our kids could go and learn how to play basketball. And point of personal story here, I literally grew up at the Y. So this was so maddening to me. I spent 3-4 hours a day, no exaggeration, after school at the Y, playing basketball every single day until I graduated high school. And so to me, this was like a place that was sacred to me. And now to see all this, and I wanted to send my kids to basketball camp there, and now I'm second guessing it. Thankfully, our community is one of the more sane ones in this regard, but it's not the case everywhere. And so that was the letter that we sent to the federal government to make them aware that this incredible budget that you have provided and these grants that you have provided for the Y are being misused because they're not in compliance with Title IX.
Right.
So that's where things stand right now. We've flagged that for the federal government. We're working with various entities to have them investigated more broadly, and we're hoping to see a change, especially because in my view, if you have something to hide, you're doing something wrong.
Right.
So the fact that these recommendations and the guidance was just flat out scrubbed from their website versus any sort of change is an admission of guilt.
Right.
Exactly.
Right. Man, okay, so this is fascinating. This is a great start. Before we dive into some more specifics, Joshua, I want to ask you, this is kind of a moral, philosophical question, but there's probably some who would watch this and say, why are you targeting transgender people? Why do you hate them? Why are you going after them? But I think what's different here is this verse that I thought of this morning. It's Proverbs 31:8. Speak up for those who cannot speak for themselves, for the rights of all who are destitute. And what's unique on this issue is we're speaking up for kids. If someone doesn't speak up, it's not like the 7-year-old girl in the locker room really has the wherewithal or the ability or the reach to defend herself. So by definition, because kids are involved in this, I think we have a moral obligation to do something in a way that maybe you don't on other issues. What do you think about that?
That's right. And that's not just, you pulling a verse out of context. That's the consistent testimony of Scripture, from the Mosaic Law that talked about, certain special care taken for widows and orphans and the sojourner, to James 1:27, pure and undefiled religion is this, to look after orphans and widows in their distress. All of Scripture is telling us, yes, we do need care for those that aren't able to look out for themselves, in a sense. And if we're going to be based on Scripture, fundamentally we should take Jesus' interpretation of it. In Matthew 19, he is asked a question about political, social hot button of his day. And he goes all the way back to creation and quotes, is it not written in Genesis? God created them male and female.
Yeah.
And so he bases his answer on issues of his own day, on the creation order. And that's where we really need to be standing as Christians.
Yeah, God's design. I mean, there's always a temptation to deviate from God's design out of this kind of faux compassion, but the end fruit is very bad. Every time we kind of deviate from these traditional norms that we discovered and God gave us, it feels like a good idea at the time maybe, but then 7-year-old girls pay the price. There's always someone who pays the price. In this example, the locker room's girl's innocence is taken away from her. It just makes me angry thinking about it now that I have kids.
And to that point of paying the price, we're not claiming that this is a Christian-only morality that we're trying to force on other people.
Yeah.
We're saying that this is the way creation works. This is the way reality works. And if you deviate from that, it really does hurt people. And that's why we're standing up against that. That's why, honestly, people like the Y or these hospitals, they're hiding what they're doing because they know that it's, well, at the most surface level, it's unpopular and controversial, but that's because it's wrong. It doesn't accord with the reality. And that's why we're trying to point it out and expose it, because we believe if it's exposed and we do tell the truth about how things really work, then that will lead to the right policy outcomes. Even if we as just a small minority of like evangelical Christians are not able to influence like an election on our own, we can speak truth that resonates with what people know.
Right. Yeah, we can arrive at these conclusions through revelation or reason, and that's why so many countries that are not, known as Christian around the world, they laugh at this stuff. They mock it. Secular regimes, even communists. I mean, Africa's totally rejected it. The whole Muslim world thinks it's laughable, but we've somehow deviated in this weird way. And even many European countries are now backing off of. They've seen the data, and it's not good. The kids are not better off when they take puberty blockers, when they do these surgeries. They often regret it. It doesn't affect, it doesn't help them. And so the scientific data is finally catching up with the common sense, which is often what happens. Now, there may be a perception among you listening that Trump kind of solved this issue. He came in, did the DEI, transgender executive order, and just kind of, brushed his hands of it, and we can move on to deporting people and whatever Trump's agenda is. But that's not the case. I mean, we just laid out this YMCA example. A lot of people are not obeying the order. There was the executive order about colleges and universities getting rid of DEI. And, DEI, people think it's about race. It's really about being anti-white, anti-Western civilization, and pro-LGBT. Those are the core tenets of DEI, what it's become. And so all this DEI stuff is LGBT, transgender, kid stuff. It's all baked in. But the colleges and universities are generally not complying. And hospitals, too, are not. And actually, this is a newer development that the FBI is investigating some hospitals. Alleigh, can you tell us about that? That's that was unthinkable in the Biden administration. And I think even in a different Republican administration would not have had the backbone to do that. But President Trump has, and credit to him for that. What kind of warning is this to other hospitals? How serious is? Are we overinflating this to say this is huge?
No, I think it is huge. If nothing else, it's a signal to the medical class writ large that he takes this issue seriously. And to your point, it's not just a one and done stroke of the pen and we're all ready to move on from it. So yes, as you mentioned, a handful of hospitals across the country are being investigated for their continued gender reassignment surgeries or prescriptions of puberty blockers, et cetera, in the time that's fallen post-executive order on these issues. it's something that our organization has been pushing really hard as well. We did a campaign called Stop the Docs. We have a lot of really good information on stopthedocs.com if you are interested in seeing if any of your local hospitals are participating in these sort of gender surgeries. And it's based on insurance submissions. And I think the point that's really important here is, especially if you're speaking with friends or people in your community who may be a little bit more left or center left, who want to, like you alluded to earlier, pretend that not fighting the transgender argument is kind or compassionate. I think we need to poke those people in a nice way, to ask them to follow the money on this. And so when you look at the insurance submissions for these hospitals, they are making a ton of money off of these children. And this, again, we're today talking about pediatric.
Really?
So this is sub 18. We did a campaign a little while ago where we focused on 4 of the worst. And just these 4, it was Minnesota Children's, Cincinnati, Pennsylvania, and then Washington, D.C. These 4 alone submitted over $1 million to their insurance providers for reimbursement. And that's just the top 4.
Right.
So this is a multi-million-dollar medical industry.
It's growing rapidly, too.
Rapidly.
Right. It was non-existent almost 10 years ago.
No.
And now it's multi-million. So
exactly.
it's a up-and-coming stock, basically.
Yep.
Yeah.
And then the thing that's most insidious is, of course, preying on these young kids, but it's creating a patient for life. So you are starting this pipeline of kids at 6, 7, 8 years old where
6.
It's as young as 3.
Oh, my gosh.
And 3 is more the indoctrination side of it.
That's what I was saying in the opening. Are you sure you're a boy? Think it over. How do you feel today?
Exactly. The planting of those seeds. And then by the time they're in mid-elementary school, kids are starting to explore those questions that have been planted because there are books in their classroom. Kids are talking about what they're getting from their devices and to each other, and they're vulnerable. I mean, it is our job to protect and steward them through this world, and it is just coming from all angles. Yeah. But to get back to the hospitals, it's this new multi-million-dollar industry, and they're creating that patient for life. So someone who's 6, 7, 8 years old who's starting on these puberty blockers, or at least socially transitioning, and then that's the next step, you have 50, 60, 70 years of medical bills, surgeries, if they choose to go, that far. And the insurance companies and medical providers see dollar signs. Right. And until organizations like the American Academy of Pediatrics start to change their guidance, you can't convince me that it's anything other than that, because the data does not support it.
Right. And it's not just the data, right? I think, Joshua, their own words, they've admitted that this is a big moneymaker. When one of you could speak.
That's right. Yeah. In fact, that was one of the doctors at the Vanderbilt University Children's Hospital, which was what prompted the Tennessee legislature to write the law that went all the way to the Supreme Court. So our decision last week, Scrimeti, U.S. versus Scrimeti, where the Supreme Court said that states can regulate this, was prompted by a leaked video of a doctor saying, this is profitable.
So the doctor was caught on hidden camera saying, this is making us a lot of money, basically?
It wasn't a hidden camera. I think it was actually like a training that just was leaked. The American Principles Project put out a study that kind of summarized all the different costs of the procedures, and for puberty blockers and then cross-sex hormones, which puberty blockers you can take for a few years, and then cross-sex hormones, someone is going to be on that for the rest of their life.
Right.
That is thousands of dollars a year in drugs. And then if they pursue any surgeries, the cheapest ones are like the $6,000-$8,000 all the way up to like $100,000.
Right.
And people might pursue 4, 5, 6 different ones.
I mean, so this is kind of incredible. I mean, I don't think people think of these dollar figures. Here's one thing they say: well, just let the kid take the puberty blockers or the cross-sex hormones for a few years while they decide. I think that's like at the very entry kind of gateway drug, literally, of this. But my understanding of these drugs is they have irreversible damage done to your body. I mean, anything messing with your hormones when you're 12 years old is going to change the way you look, how you turn out, because you're changing so much at that age. And we know even like your diet changing as a kid can affect your nutrition levels, can impact how you turn out and how tall you are and all these things. So changing your hormones certainly will. Isn't it true that these puberty blockers, these cross-sex hormones, are not simply like Tylenol that if you stop taking it, your life goes back to normal?
Yeah, that is true. They have irreversible consequences. And I think what's really important to remember, too, is kids don't have the understanding to know that something they're doing to their body at 10, 11, 12 years old, they don't know what it looks like to be 25, to be 30. I mean, this is, again, back to the science of it. Like, your brain is just not developed enough.
They still believe in Santa.
They still believe in Santa, like,
I mean, just think about that.
Yeah. And it's wild. So they rely on us as parents to be those guardrails. And it sounds so cliche, but, it's the same way that we tell our kids that they must wear a helmet when they ride a bike. Mm-hmm. It is your job to be the bad cop in these types of scenarios, lovingly, because you're protecting their brain and their body. But I think one thing that often gets overlooked in this, with that talking point from the supportive physicians in this regard, or the left writ large, is that these are organs. They're functioning sex organs that provide a purpose for your life and the creation of new life.
Right.
This isn't, I slammed my finger in the car door and should we cut it off or not? Like, you're going to be just fine.
Yeah.
A little weird, but like just fine missing a finger. If your body cannot produce those hormones, you are subject to issues for the remainder of your life. And that's if you just go on these cross-sex hormones and puberty blockers and then try and reverse it. And we've seen, unfortunately, a lot of stories from detransitioners and from folks who were, in a place where they started these procedures and then realized maybe this wasn't the right step. Right. And so that's something that often that's overlooked.
Yeah, I mean, the other thing about that is, if you leave kids alone to develop normally, go through puberty at a normal time, experience all the physiological changes, the natural hormones their body produces often makes their feelings that they might be the other sex go away.
Right.
There's high rates of, I think it's called desistance, where like they you might have a teenager that is a boy but thinks he's a girl, or a girl that thinks she's a boy, and then give her 6-8 years and she no longer thinks that, or he no longer thinks that. If you put them on the drugs, it's like the whole identity thing is about what they're feeling inside. Yeah. And these sex hormones that we're injecting into them interfere with their body's natural development and change what they're feeling inside. And so there's almost nobody, once they start the drugs, gets off of it. Because they don't ever change their mind.
There's also an opportunity here for us to pull back the love of diversity from our friends on the other side of this issue, because when you're telling especially kids that if you feel a certain way, you must be a girl, or if you feel a certain way, don't you think you're a boy, all we're doing is solidifying those gender stereotypes and removing the diversity of it. Like I mentioned earlier, I grew up playing basketball at the Y forever. Like, I mean, today, if I were spending 3 or 4 hours in the gym, people would be telling me, "Oh, you sure like sports a lot. Are you sure you're a girl?" And my brother, who loved to garden with my mom, like, "Are you sure you're a boy?" And so we're removing the beauty and the uniqueness of every soul on this planet if we're telling them that the things that they enjoy, the colors that they like, the clothes they like to wear, are what make them male and female, instead of the obvious biological reality, and then just loving them for the diverse things and interests that make them beautiful. And so I think it's an opportunity, and I love to pull that card when I talk to some of my friends who are more supportive of the other side of this argument, and say to them, well, if you think that someone's interested in this and that makes them a boy,
It's sexist.
That's sexist.
Yeah.
And you're removing what makes them unique. And so I think that's a place where we can kind of, really have that conversation on with the vocabulary of the other side and own that part of the argument.
That's a really interesting point. And I think this is going to be unpopular, but I think we have to say that the attention you get from transitioning has to be intoxicating for these kids and these parents. It's proven medically that there, Munchausen syndrome and other things where people go to the doctor just for the attention they get from the care. And I'm not saying that they classify in that, diagnosis, but if you're an 8-year-old kid and nobody cares about you in your mind and nobody pays attention to you and your older siblings and you're the middle kid and your older brother gets all the attention and your baby sister is the cutest and you don't, have a sense of identity, but then all of a sudden you start talking about maybe being trans and suddenly you draw in all this attention, you have a community, you have an identity. There's kind of a perverse incentive to a very attention hungry kid to start going down this path and get just inundated with affirmation from those people who think they're helping the kid but are really not, especially when you have these parents, transgender parents or gay or lesbian parents who have like 2 or 3 trans kids, which is a statistical impossibility without being it's so rare, and then to have all of your children be this.
It also happens in friend groups where you'll have in
the whole
in
friend
space
group,
of 2 years, a whole friend group of tween girls became trans, and that doesn't happen.
Right. There's no way, even if you accept the lie that people were born in the wrong body, which is kind of a ridiculous lie that the rest of the world is laughed off. There's no way that you and your whole lunch table at school were all born in the wrong body statistically. So there's peer pressure, there's parental pressure, there's these weird rewards from social media and from society. And then what ends up happening is people reject their parents. And so you actually destroy a family often. You either have the parents have to go all in and embrace the lie and support the pathology, or they fight back and you split the whole family because you have all these people telling you your parents hate you, they don't accept you, which is already a tempting lie for a teenager or a young kid, to rebel against their parents. And so now your parents are bigots who hate you and don't understand anything and don't understand science because these, medical groups have been captured by ideology on, this, on COVID and other things.
And that's often not good for the kids because
it's not good at all.
Good authority that God put in their life.
No, it destroys the family.
You've had kids run away from home, end up homeless for years, end up getting sex trafficked because they ran away from parents that didn't affirm their wrong ideas about who they were.
Right. And so then what we've seen in states like California is if you don't embrace it, you can actually risk losing custody. Have you guys worked on that? I mean, talk about American parents' rights. And I've seen there was a proposal, I think, in Colorado for something similar. I don't think it got across the finish line. Can either of you speak to that? I mean, if somebody tries to take my kids away from me, talk about a revolution. If there's ever a reason to have one, that's got to be it.
Yeah, there's also another case. I believe this may be the one you're referencing that started in California. The father now lives in Texas, and he actually did lose custody and visitation. We have not gotten into that from a organizational perspective other than to make our position very clear on it. But I think it's one of the reasons that many parents who may, by and large, agree, or their antenna has kind of gone up and been like, wait, this doesn't feel right to me. I don't think my kid has never shown any sign of gender dysphoria before, and now they're telling me this, may make their antenna go up, but then they get stuck because they go to a therapist who then may say, the myth of would you rather have a dead son or an alive daughter? And so they're being told to affirm here. They have this understanding that the state may steal custody of their kid, and then what do?
Right.
You're stuck between a rock and a hard place where in your heart and mind and your child. But then how far can you push them without fear that one of these other entities is going to step in against you? And it's a very real predicament for many families. And one piece of advice that we talk about quite a bit is parents really need to be comfortable with having uncomfortable conversations and being the ones hopefully to introduce them for the first time.
Yes.
Because if your child brings that home, they've already heard a point of view which they are more inclined to believe, because they don't necessarily think that a teacher, a coach, a friend is going to tell them a lie. In the same way that most kids, especially younger ones, don't necessarily think that their parents are lying to them. So being the person who introduces these ideas, even when they're controversial, it's a uncomfortable thing that we have to be comfortable with. Now, I'm not advocating for doing so in an age-inappropriate way or like too soon, but you need to have an understanding of where the societal risks are so that you can be the one to have those types of conversations with your kids, and they're hearing it from you first with the backdrop of your value system, and they're not getting it first from someone who doesn't have their best interest at heart.
Man.
And it's not just in California. There's been parents losing their kids over this in Indiana, Montana.
Really?
Yeah.
Really?
In fact,
not just the People's
DC.
Republic of California.
Yeah. There was a case out of Montana where social services actually shipped the kid off to live with a family in Canada because the parents
Deported
would not allow the child to get gender transition procedures. And then, right here in Washington, D.C., the Children's Hospital basically stole a kid from his parents.
And put this person, who I believe is now 18. I think they've aged out. They were right on the cusp, like 16, 17. Put that person not just into like the foster care system, but put them in the care of the physician or nurse. There was some connection of who had been treating them in the hospital. They were like actually given the custodial ownership.
The physician.
Of it,
yes.
I don't know that it was a physician. You may remember better than me, but it was certainly someone who was responsible in some way for their care.
Wow.
And they
not like
were,
a distant aunt or something.
No. Not a relative. And they were put in charge of this individual's care at the expense of the family.
The government or these officials taking control of your children, that's what happens in China. I mean, people know, like, your kids are not your own in countries like China. You kind of get to see them, and the government controls them and educates them and molds them, and then they rent them out to you on the weekends or something. And that's what it sounds like. This is, I didn't know it was so widespread that states, their kids are being taken over this. Kids who cannot get a tattoo, who cannot drive sometimes, and depending on their age, cannot buy alcohol, or years from buying alcohol, can't buy cigarettes, can't join the army.
Probably can't even get aspirin at school without their parents' permission.
You
and
can't
now,
buy cough syrup.
Yeah,
exactly.
and now, like, they can not only choose to get these drugs, but override their parents in getting these drugs.
Or how about chop off their body parts? Now let's see. So the reaction I'm hearing, I'm thinking through this conversation with like a supporter, an invisible supporter at the table. I'm going to say, well, that's not really happening. We're not, that's what they're going to say. Well, that's usually the response. You don't know all the details well. You're not like sophisticated on the details. That's not happening anymore. It never happened. Surgeries didn't happen to kids. So did surgeries actually happen to minors? Because that's what they say. Well, that's for 18. The drugs maybe, but minors didn't get surgeries. And then they say it's not happening anymore. You're taking old examples. So is that true or what?
It's a little bit of both. So it is absolutely still happening, and that's why the Trump administration, Department of Justice, opened these investigations into a handful of hospitals where they have credible data that this is in fact still happening. Is it widespread? No. This is not, thankfully, happening on every street corner, and every pediatric office is not trying to indoctrinate your kids. However, you need to have that in your head and sort of operate from that perspective. Yeah. And I'll give a personal example. We, typically go to a family dentist, who we know and love. My daughter needed a specialized procedure. We had to go somewhere else. On the intake form, they ask all the standard demographic questions. The one for her sex said male, female, non-binary. I selected female. we went into the
How
office,
brave.
right?
You're so brave. Yeah.
Sat down, started to go through. The dentist then comes in and is confirming her information, says, this is your name, this is your age, and you identify as a girl. And she kind of looks at me and she says, I'm a girl, and she's 6. And we keep going. And so in that moment, would I have ever, now obviously doing what I do and just being an adult, I understand what was happening there. Thankfully, my child did not. But that could go many different ways. And those are the types of things that parents need to have in their head, where it's all of these, to borrow a word from the left, this topic's version of microaggressions. But there's all these little things that happen in society that start to nudge and normalize. Walking into Target and seeing the tuck-friendly bathing suits in the women's swimsuit section. All of these little things start to pile up, where all of a sudden you notice that your 6 and 7-year-old has been exposed to all of these things and may start asking questions. And that's why, to go back to what I said earlier, you have to have in your head what you're going to say and be ready to say it, and have these types of conversations with your kids when you feel that they're ready, so that those values are coming from you and not from all of these nudges in society.
Yeah, so most medical organizations that provide this care use a standards of care, like a treatment plan, so to speak, that was created by an organization called the World Professional Association of Transgender Health,
Okay.
which is shortened to WPATH, the initials there. WPATH has gone through multiple revisions of these guidelines. A couple years ago, they were working on version 8. And in a draft version, they had recommended minimum ages for all the different treatments. And for most surgeries, their recommended age was 15 or 16 or 17. Okay. In other words, at least some older minors could get these surgeries. Yeah. After some discovery in a lawsuit challenging Alabama's law protecting kids from this, it was revealed in discovery that there were some emails exchanged between WPATH officials and the Biden administration, specifically the Assistant Secretary for Health and Human Services, Rachel Levine, who is himself a man, a transgender identifying man, and his assistant. They pressured WPATH to remove these age minimums from their final guidance because they feared the political backlash that would result. And in the final guidance that was released, WPATH had removed those ages. Now, based on that, it's not clear what hospitals do or don't decide to provide surgeries to minors. In most cases, they would probably say something like, we determine that on a case-by-case basis. Yeah. So you can't really know what that is. As of 2022, I did some research showing that at least 13 hospitals were providing these surgeries to minors. Some of the worst was like the one in Boston that I think is one of the ones the Trump administration is investigating now, that was providing these surgeries to kids as young as 13, and had like positive sounding testimonials on their website.
There is a database, Do No Harm, an organization that we've worked with here and there, has a database where they have that information, and it's based on the submitted insurance charges. It does not have ages, of course, HIPAA, and also these are minors, but it does show you the workload and number of prescriptions filed, et cetera, from each of these hospitals, so you can get a pretty clear view on who is providing what type of, quote, care. And so that information does exist, and it's very easy to see, to go full circle back to where we started at the top, that it is very much a financially motivated industry, and that it is in fact happening, and there is data that supports that it is happening.
Yeah. So this, I think, I'm glad we're talking about this, because I think people think that they've sort of won on this issue, because it feels like we've won the cultural argument. There's been a lot of good reporting. I think What is a Woman was like a defining documentary on this issue, kind of exposed the silliness of the core roots of a lot of the transgender, argument and ideology. But because the Biden administration was so aggressive, I don't think people realize how aggressively pro-LGBT, specifically trans, they really were. They filtered a lot of this stuff down really quickly. And even though, President Trump is has been vocal on it. He's done executive orders, even though the polling shows that when it comes to transgender issues in kids, the majority of people are very against it. It is by no means gone. And you raised the point that it's not every doctor or hospital is like pushing this on every corner. And that's true. But I would say that there are teachers in almost every school that are pushing it. And so education in particular is an area where the pressure really is coming. You see all these, there's a Libs of TikTok account on Twitter that's exposed to a lot of these teachers. But find me as a large school in a big city that doesn't have a pride flag in the classroom. And so that has been totally woven through the education system and is getting pushed at that level, right?
I might push back on that and
that's
say
allowed. That's fine.
that it might be at almost every hospital. I agree that it's at almost every
so you're
school.
pushing back on Alleigh. That's even better. Not me. That's great. That's great. Yeah.
It might be at every hospital. Maybe not like some religiously oriented hospitals, but hospitals have made a very determined effort to hide it.
Okay.
There was the situation out of the Texas Children's Hospital where these procedures were banned in Texas. Texas Children said, okay, we're no longer providing these procedures. And then along comes a whistleblower who said, well, actually, they still are providing these procedures, and I have the receipts to prove it. Yeah. Now, to your point, the Biden administration then decided to charge him with HIPAA violations.
Yeah, they charged the people telling the truth.
Exactly.
The people mutilating children.
Then another nurse came forward and said, no, I was actually required to teach this boy to give himself estrogen shots. And so then she got fired by the hospital. So they hide it. They have ways around it. They falsify the codes or just put a generic one on there so you can't really tell what it's for. So I would encourage parents to be very vigilant with any hospital.
Wow.
There's probably a lot, or at least a handful that aren't providing it, but I would say they're so deceptive about it that you should be vigilant.
It's this is a common theme on the issues. As a listener, notice that the people punished are the ones telling the truth, not the ones mutilating children or hiding things from parents or falsifying documents. If you, as a dad in California, say, I want to keep my kid from transitioning, their kid is taken from them. If you are a whistleblower and you say, hey, this hospital is breaking the law, the whistleblower is prosecuted. If another whistleblower comes forward, they're prosecuted. And I think that's a hallmark in our age and our time on political issues when something really corrupt is going on, when the people who are telling the truth are the ones who pay the price, not the ones breaking the law. It seems that telling the truth on this issue and a few others that are the most nefarious, that's the real crime, is telling the truth. And I think that's a really important thing to look for when you think, oh, we won this battle, Trump's in office, he's taking care of it. No, people are still being prosecuted for unveiling the truth. It's still rippling through the education system. It's still in the back corners of all these hospitals. And that's why I'm really glad that we're talking about it. I'm glad you guys could come in. Any final word you think is important for our listeners as we kind of land this plane?
Just to plug some of the work that our organization has done. On our website, AmericanParentsCoalition.org, we have a whole page of resources. And so if anyone is looking for conversation guides, like how to talk to your kids about certain stuff, or also I want to call the YMCA. I'm unsure exactly what I'm looking for, how to ask those questions. We have some kind of like phone tree type stuff, choose your own adventure. Like if they say this, ask this question. If you want to write a letter to a representative, we have some templates and formats. So we have a lot of great stuff on our website. But the biggest thing that I would say to take away, to echo your point, be vigilant. Understand that this stuff is out there. Don't be afraid of it, but be ready to have conversations about it with your own values and viewpoint being the introductory, salvo into the conversation. And hold your kids tight, raise them well.
That's right.
And I think I would just encourage people that, what the Bible says, that God created us male and female in His image, is actually reality. We don't have to apologize for that. We don't have to be intimidated by another viewpoint or think that we have to compromise. We should be bold in standing on that because we know that is really what love of neighbor looks like. That's what's really good for these kids. That's what's really good for everybody. And not just from a Christian perspective. That's just the way the world is. And we should just stand on that.
Well, great place to end it. Thank you guys so much. This is the Outstanding Podcast. I think it was pretty outstanding, as I always do. I'm biased. You can please subscribe, like the video if you're watching online, comment, share this with someone. This is really important. It is the truth, and it's rooted in God's word, and we want to get the message out there, and we rely on you to do that, because I'm not sure on episodes like this, I don't think the algorithm is helping us out too much. So we need you to get it out. Subscribe. And you can also find our reporting at thewashingtonstand.com online. Thanks for listening. Joshua, Alleigh, thanks for joining us.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Outstanding is a production of The Washington Stand, your source for news and commentary from a biblical worldview. This podcast is made in the USA by producer Casey Harper, production assistant Rachel Woods, technical producers David Salkeld and Yusuf Fletcher, and executive producer Jared Bridges. Help support us by texting the word outstanding to 67742 and read more at washingtonstand.com.